has issues, but I think it's the recorder, but it only will take a 16 gig thingy. All right, so I put the same words of the day. I'm not being repetitive. It's just we're talking about the in stuff here. So logos and telos. And we already talked about it, so I'll go through that. But the really cool stuff today is I promised I'd talk about translations, because everybody wants to know about translations. Where's Max? Max is favorite on translations. Translations and studies. So what I've done is I've listed these, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different types of translations. But what you got to realize is that within the context of translations, it's there's not just 5. There's multiples in between each type. So, and each type is a variable. So, well, for example, and let's start with the most common, or not common, the most the lowest level. There's Max. Max, this is about translations. I know you want to hear this. Okay. Because this is exciting to me too. Anybody read War and Peace? Okay. Even better. Anybody read The Three Musketeers?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever picked up a bad translation of The Three Musketeers? None of you have? I have. The Three Musketeers is a really cool book. It's really fun, by Alexander Dumas, about the Three Musketeers. If you ever pick up a bad translation, you start reading it. If you ever read a good translation and you read a bad translation, you'll go, oh my goodness. Or no, even better, you got to have read Heidi. Anyone read Heidi before? 100 years ago. You got to read it. Read it to your kids. Heidi is probably the most godly book from that era, especially, ever written. But it's written in German. Swiss German to be most precise. But the really interesting thing about it is, you ever notice a part that in the movies they usually get it right? The organ grinder, had a monkey. But you know what they usually translate it as? A turtle or a tortoise.
Those two words in German are really different.
The thing is, in Swiss German, they're not. And so the translators, usually of the book, make a mistake. It's either in the transcription because it was written in the old German style, which the language is really strange, or they get it wrong. So translating even what we would consider very common and simple works gets really difficult. And anyone who's read translations of anything, you got to be cautious, because there are many different types of translations, and that's what we're going to talk about. Number one translation is in interlinear. I'm going from the very bottom. An interlinear translation takes every word within the context of the language and then puts it directly in. So, for example, this is in the Greek. So this is let's see. This should be the end of Hebrews. Hebrews 13, 24 and 25. I'm going to read the transliteration. So it's each Greek word with the English words below it. Greet ye all the leading of you, and all the saints greet. You the ones from Italy. Grace with all you. Now you can kind of get it. Remember, this is kind of like the literal I give you, right? I give you a literal translation. By the way, that's what it is. It's literally the Greek and also in the Greek form. As you know, languages don't have the same, like in English. We always do the subject, the verb, the object of the verb, and then if it's a dative case, the object of the predicate, right? So we do In English, it's always the same. In other languages, it's not. Anybody studied Spanish or Latin or German, you know, right? They're different. And the word, the way they do it is different. And by the way, because other languages identify the accusative, dative, we don't talk about this stuff. It's the predicate, the object, predicate, the subject, but they call that the nominative, the accusative, the dative, and the genitive cases. Okay, we should talk about it this way, but we don't. We should. But every language is different, and languages that identify the nominative, the genitive, the accusative, and the dative cases in the articles or the words, guess what they can do?
They can switch their word order all around.
Yeah, their word order goes crazy. In English, we can't do that because English is a very super complex language. We like to think it's simple, but it is really, really complex. Ask anyone who's learned English as a second language. There are so many ways to say things in English, even though we have a declarative sentence structure, that it drives people nuts. We have do forms. Do forms.
We're not German. Don't speak in German.
No, not those do forms. The do forms of the verbs in English. English has multi-verbs and verb forms that no other language even comes close to. We have so many verb forms that it's almost impossible for many languages to even translate some of our forms. We constrain verbs in ways that no one else. Like, for example, I am a man. I do wish to be a man. I was a man. I have been a man. I might have been a man. These are constrained verb forms that we use. We call them helper verbs. They're not helper verbs. Most other languages, German does have what we call helper verbs, but they're not helper verbs. They're actual verbs that modify the tense of the verb. May I do this? Can I do this? Remember the can and may they used to educate children on, right? Nobody knows what it means anymore, right? These are declarative ways of modifying verbs that are not adverbial, that actually change the way the verbs work. Other languages don't have these forms. Guess what they do, though, in the translations to English? We just toss them around willy-nilly. Remember, we saw that when we were translating the Greek. But in any case, this is a Greek interlinear. The biggest problem with the interlinear Greek is, as we've seen, we saw it a lot. If I have a word, my favorite word in all Greek, okay, meta epithumia. Meta epithumia. Epithumia. Okay, this is the scent of the sacrifice. This is the epithumia in translated poorly in English is lust, but it's really desire. Okay? But epithumia, thumia means the scent of the sacrifice. Epithumia means literally pretty much the infinite or the outgoing sense of the sacrifice. Meta-epithumia means the infinite and eternal outgoing of the scent of the sacrifice from man to God in Greek. This word is usually translated pleasant. That's the problem you have. So I'm reading my interlinear, and my interlinear says meta-epithumia in the Greek, and underneath it says pleasant. Does anybody see a problem with that? Okay? This is a problem with interlinears. Because if you want to study them, you have to, if you really want to study the Greek, you can't depend on the translation in the interlinear either. This is a constant problem in translating. The translators, yes, sir.
Does the Greek, I think English has lots of synonyms.
Yes.
Are there lots of synonyms in Greek language?
Not really. Okay, maybe I should go back to the beginning about Greek. I should have put my notes. I usually have the notes. When we go through when we start the Torah class, I'll talk about Hebrew, okay? But usually when I start the Greek class, I always start with about Greek, history of Greek and stuff like that, the history of the times. But in Greek, Greek is a very, very sparse language. Ancient languages are all sparse languages. There's about 20,000 words identified in them. As a matter of fact, I've got it in here, I've got it in my notes, and we'll talk about it. If you look at Woodhouse, Woodhouse is the most declarative dictionary of Greek, of ancient Greek in the world. I don't think there's 20,000 words in Woodhouse. I haven't counted, but there's not 20. It's not a huge book, and it's on the internet. You can find it. The point is that it is a sparse language. All ancient languages are sparse. All of them. English has 1 million words. We are somehow collectors. Most languages don't do that. Like the French. In fact, the French have become collectors, but what do? You never heard this? They fine you if you they fine people in France for using foreign words that have French equivalents. So if you are a news announcer and you use the word, I used to have an example, but I don't have an example. There's a beautiful example that in English or in words like cyber something, okay, that if you use that word, they will fine you. There's a French word that's this long that's the same word. The reason I don't use this word is because it's like stupid, right? But the French have had to go back and they have actually invented words in their language so that people don't have to use foreign equivalents. Languages, the French have got it, we don't, but that's okay. English is a language that picks up words. From kimono to typhoon to kamikaze to, whatever. We pick up words everywhere, and we borrow them. And as a matter of fact, we have words that we don't even know how to pronounce properly. Macabre is an Anglo-Saxon word. It's not French, but people like to pronounce it macabre. That's the incorrect pronunciation. It's macabre because it's an Anglo-Saxon word. Just saying. So we don't even understand our own language half the time. Anyway, languages are very complex, and you have very limited words to choose from. The Greeks make words. Remember, every time we see these, the Greeks believe that their words are self-explanatory. And therefore, if you can't understand it, you are a barbarian. As a matter of fact, we believe that because what do you study to study for the SAT and ACT? Come on, The most important thing they make you study in vocabulary for the ACT and the SAT are Greek prefixes and suffixes, because presumably you can figure out what it means, these complex English words that we borrowed from the Greeks and the Romans borrowed from the Greeks. You can figure out what they mean if you know the prefix and the suffix, right? Wait, you got to know this. You got to go study for the ACT and SAT if you haven't already, because you'll get so bored with them. Your kids will tell you, Mom, Dad, we have to learn these. These are terrible, right? And they'll forget them the minute they, have used them. I'm just saying, we even believe that to a degree. But the most important thing to recognize is languages go two ways. When we talk about the Torah class, I'll talk about Hebrew. But Hebrew is a super euphemistic language. Anybody in the first service, when we're reading about Isaiah? No, nobody's in the first service. In first service, we're reading about Isaiah, and it used the words, remember, the cobra, the name of the cobra, and the child will lead them. And you read that, and you hear that, and you go, your brain's cooking, right? Now, we are from a very euphemistic language, so you immediately began to do what? I hope you did. I hope you started thinking about the symbols that those meant, right? You got to realize, when the Hebrews are writing about lambs and lions and about bears eating wheat and straw and lions eating straw, do you think they're writing about literally lions eating straw? They're not stupid. God made lions to not eat straw. There's more to the picture than that. They are telling you something symbolic. Now, if you believe that they're really lions eating straw, then you are what kind of mindset? Greek. The Greeks are concrete. The Greeks, if a Greek author wrote that the lions were eating straw, he'd probably be booted out of the academy. Right? Because that is literal. In English, they're symbolic. In Hebrew, they are symbolic. In Greek, they're not. Languages go two ways. We see a variance between what I would call Greek concretism, concreteness, and euphemism that we see in English or Hebrew or in Japanese. Now, Japanese is probably the most euphemistic language in the world. Hebrew is probably the second most. What does that mean? In Greek, this can only mean one thing. You can't gain more than one meaning from this word. This word is a specific word with no other meaning at all. However, other languages, to make up for the sparsity of the language, they have to reuse the words. For example, in Japanese, the word koi. A koi is a fish. A koi means love. A koi is also another something of compassion. Can you imagine if I said I koi you and you think I'm talking about dinner and I'm trying to do matrimony? Right? It's all contextual. Hebrew is the same way. The word alf, in Hebrew means a cow, a friend, an individual, a number, a letter, a companion. Which one is it? What's the context? And in our poetry, they're many times multi-contextual, which goes back to the problem of translations. So I have an interlinear. An interlinear translation is a great kind of translation, but it has real issues. It has really big issues. The big issues is, number one, you got to know, you got to understand the words used, and you really need to understand the verb text, the verb forms. Usually when you use an interlinear translation, if you really want to get deep into it, you got to have a pony. Anyone know what a pony is? Ever heard of a pony? Okay, a pony, in English, a pony is this. If I have, the first person singular. First person singular is I. The first person plural is we. The second person singular is you, and the second person plural is you. And you go on, and then you also have the accusative, dative, and in all languages, nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive forms. So when I put together a pony, I have all the forms of the pronouns, and then I put the forms of the verbs. Verb forms are a real problem, but you have to understand to a degree verb forms. And remember, in verb forms you have present, past, past perfect, perfect tense, la 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 la. But in a pony, usually a pony is a single sheet for most languages, sometimes multiple sheets, depending on how complex. English probably has like 10 pages. But in most languages, it's a single sheet. And the single sheet tell you the pronouns, pronoun uses, and the declarative type functions of the adverbs, the verbs. Okay, gets complicated, right? I'm not saying you have to, but when you're looking at an interlinear source, you got to be cautious of the words used and the way they're used within the context if you want to understand it. Now, I'm going to tell you some sources that you can use that will help you. But like I said, what I do, most of the time I use this interlinear Greek. I use it to get the precise words. I don't really use it for reading or study per se, For the classes, I use it to find the words. Remember I tell you that I use the words, when I give you the Greek words, I give them to declensions, I'll make sure they're right through this. This is one of the ways. You can also compare sentences and structure and other things, but usually I'll use internet sources for that. Because the internet sources will tell me what all the verbs and the pronouns and all the verb declensions are, and that way I don't have to get my pony out. Okay? So, yeah, it gets complicated. But even in interlinear, which we would consider the simplest form, is complicated. I'll give you another complexity. I'll use an example. Look, I'm sure there's English examples, but the best ones I got are this, okay? If you read in England, in German, Ich bin kalt. Anybody know what Ich bin kalt?
I'm cold.
Okay, that's what you think. If you want to say you're cold in German, you say Es ist mir kalt. You use the dative expression. The reason is because if you say Ich bin kalt,
You're the essence of cold.
well, actually, you just
That's
told me
your
that you're
name.
frigid. It's a sexual connotation. So, what I'm telling you is, if you have a person who doesn't understand German very well and they're translating German, and you try to do it in an interlinear fashion, you can really get the message wrong.
I'm a jelly donut.
Yeah, ich bin Berliner. Okay, this is interesting. I find this fascinating. Remember we got our ego imi? Let's see, man, I need a brighter thing. Remember our ego imi form? Ego imi? In Greek? Ego imi means I am. Never to be used in Greek, right? If you use that form, it is a declarative form that is only used in very rare forms and cases. Very rare. In German, ich bin. Not as rigorous a form, but if I say ich bin, I am Berliner. What did I just say?
I'm a jelly donut.
Well, you said you're a jelly donut, but why? How would you say I'm from Berlin?
Ich komme aus Berlin.
Ich komme aus Berlin. Yeah. So
I come from Berlin.
I come from Berlin. There are other ways of saying it, but in many languages, even Western languages, there is an implied restriction in the use of the I am forms. Just like ich bin kalt, es ist mir kalt, right? Okay, so it makes a joke for the Germans when Americans try to come over and speak their language, and they say, well, that's pretty funny, what are you telling me, right? Just like you